Welcome to this episode of the Comic Watchers. I'm Chad. I'm flying solo today because our guest is across the pond, as I guess they say, and so to better suit his time frame, then we're doing it earlier in the day. But I don't know what show this is because we're around 300 and we're trying to plan something for 300, and so there might be some making some funny numbers. But enough about that. Let me bring in our guest, Alex Paknadel, who is continuing to work his X-Men work. He's going to be writing the new Cyclops miniseries. So let's bring him in, find out what he's been up to since we last chatted in August of 2024. Wow, it's been a while. Hey, Alex, how's it going?
Very well. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thanks for taking the time to out of your schedule. I know not only are you working, but you're also a family man. So
it's all right. He's reasonably self-sufficient. I've got him downstairs with a big knife. He'll be fine.
Okay, good. Well, so I know, like I said, we chatted in 2024 when you were getting ready to begin your Sentinels run, and you were doing the X-Men Infinity comic. What have you been up to since then, and before we get into talking about your latest project?
Thanks. So Sentinels came out. Very proud of that. I ended up doing a pretty kind of solid year and some change on the Infinity comic. I don't know if I think it's either me or Anthony Oliveira who kind of holds the record for the most number of Infinity comics. I don't know quite. I think it's Anthony probably just nudges it, but I did a lot. And then it's sort of, I did a two-hander with Tim Seeley, and that was all great. Ended up doing a ton of them with the wonderful, the lovely Philip Seavey. So yeah, that came out, and had a Dormammu one-shot that was very well received. Really enjoyed doing that. Sort of a London-based cosmic horror. Did a bunch of stuff for DC, mainly in the sort of Flash realm. So, Cy Spurrier brought me on board for a couple of sort of short minis and sort of Flash annuals and that kind of thing. So I got to sort of very much like ride pillion with him while he was doing that. And yeah, apart from that, I've been doing what, as we say in England, odds and sods, just sort of bits and bobs here and there, all very fun.
I got kind of excited. Then I got confused. It's like, oh, he's doing the Ultimates year 2, and it's like, oh wait, they're ending the Ultimates.
yeah. So I got to co-write an Ultimates one shot with Dennis Camp. And it was the Ultimate Universe 2 years in, and it was basically a sort of Ultimate Guardians of the Galaxy story. So the brief there was to sort of, Dennis said, how do you fancy writing something that sort of spans thousands of years, and you get to introduce a bunch of sort of Marvel characters in sort of different interesting ways? I said, yeah, that sounds great. So we came up with all sorts of interesting sort of ultimatized spins on characters, like Modos, mental organism designed only for sorcery, who's like a combination of MODOK and Doctor Strange. Herald, who's like a combination of the Thing and Silver Surfer, and there was some more sort of abstracted ones. So like there was Ultimate Daredevil, who is a Beyonder. So instead of sort of losing his sight, the Beyonder has lost, I think, 4 million somatic senses, leaving him only with 13. So he can sort of jump in and out of panels and sort of, is aware that he's in a comic and stuff. That was a lot of fun.
Oh. And like I said, you are once again back in the X universe as the Shadows of Tomorrow kick off. And so tell us a little, before we get started talking about, Cyclops, the series itself, tell us a little bit about your history. I know we've talked about this before, your history as a reader of the X-Men and in this particular universe.
Thanks.
Or corner of the universe.
So, I mean, I was a Marvel reader pretty much from year dot. So, I mean, I sort of say this a lot, but it's true. My dad taught me to read with Marvel Treasury editions. You know, I was sat on his knee, you know, as a toddler with these, you know, oversized kind of, you know, Marvel Treasury editions from the 70s. And he used those to teach me to read. So they've kind of always been there. And then he always had, so he had like a bunch of British reprints of Marvel comics, black and white reprints, and I was always allowed to read them because he didn't really mind if they got kind of messed up or whatever. But he always had, you know, this special closet where he kept all of his American collection, which is about 3,000 that he collected from sort of like late 60s to late 70s. Well, no, early 80s actually. He stopped around about when I was born. For some reason, you know, the two events magically coincided when he needed money for a kid, I guess. But yeah, I wasn't allowed in that closet because, you know, that was the kind of the real stuff. And of course, that made it absolutely irresistible to me. I mean, I'm sure I mentioned this before, but there's an episode of The Simpsons where like Bart goes around to play at the Wiggum's house, and they go into like Chief Wiggum's, you know, closet, and he says to him at one point, he says, you know, Ralphie, how dare you go into my forbidden cabinet of mystery? And it was like that for me, you know what I mean? It was just forbidden fruit. So I used to sneak in there, and I think I was saying on something the other day, I took a bunch of Star Wars, you know, the original Star Wars Marvel run, and I sort of, you know, kept it under my bed to read. And our cat pooped on them.
Oh,
yeah. So, like many years later, the first US show I ever did, I think, which was Rose City in Portland in about 2015. I saw someone had a really cherry copy of Star Wars #1, the Marvel set, you know, Star Wars #1. I think it was the 50-cent one, if that's the less rare one. But anyway, they had it up for like $150, and I thought, man, I can't not get it. I have to make this right 20 years later. So I ended up buying it and taking it and sort of presenting it to my dad and just going, here's to replace the one that the cat pooped on that was my fault. But as to the X-Men specifically, that was just a weird kind of confluence of events. So I got super sick in like summer 1991 when I got hospitalized. And I think my dad just felt so bad because, like, you know, there was a non-zero chance that I was, I guess, not going to make it. And so my dad just brought me in, like while I was recovering, he brought me in like a stack of the Claremont Cochrane, Claremont Burn run, you know, the run basically. And so like while I was convalescing in hospital, I just kind of inhaled that for the first time. And I'd always known that, you know, my dad thought that like X-Men was where it's at. Everything else was basically kind of training wheels for X-Men, right? And I got out of hospital, you know, and I recovered, and my dad took me to Forbidden Planet in London when it was on New Oxford Street. And it's just huge, you know, it was like, I mean, like our version of like Midtown, basically. It's just this enormous cathedral to comics, right? And went in there, and it was the month that X-Men 1 dropped. So I basically I almost fell out of my hospital bed right into the blue and gold team era, which, you know, and it was cool because like my dad kind of didn't like it, which was great because it meant it was mine. So I read his X-Men, and then I immediately read my X-Men, and then I was just hooked for life. You know, I was there for, you know, like probably the second most kind of, you know, renowned era. Yeah. And I just got the bug and never really lost it.
So let's dive into Cyclops. I mean, I'm not X-Men is not, I guess, my thing. But I know generally what's, you know, been happening. There was the whole Age of Revelation, and then they're back now that they're back in the present. They're trying to prevent whatever happened there. So, kind of bring us up to speed on Cyclops, if you can, through the Age of Revelation, through to where we find him.
I mean, I will foreground this just by saying you don't need that to read this book.
Mm-hmm.
Where he is basically he's had a sort of night. He's where Jed's got him is he's basically kind of suffering from like the world's worst Cassandra complex, right? He's seen the future, like he knows what's coming. So that's kind of where he is in sort of adjectiveless X-Men, right? But in our book, I mean, I had a very, very early conversation with Tom Brevoort about it, and I said my dream for the book is that it's going to be an evergreen. So an evergreen in the same way that something like, and I know this is like a lofty ambition. I'm not saying I'm going to achieve it, but it's you got to aim high. My aim is that it's going to be one of those things like Weapon X or Magneto Testament, or Wolverine Havoc Meltdown, where or like the original Wolverine miniseries, where you're going to be able to pick it up off the shelf in 10 years and it's still going to be self-contained, it's still going to make sense, it's going to be cohesive, and it's going to have a beginning and a middle and an end. So while nothing that I'm doing sort of militates against anything that's happening in the X line, and you can absolutely, it touches on it, it's the same, you catch a glimpse of the team as it is now. There are nods to kind of current continuity, but you don't really need any of it. It's very much kind of designed to be, sort of self-contained and very accessible.
So, without giving any, major plot points or reveals, give us a, just a overview of what the story's about and what Cyclops is dealing with.
Okay, so I mean, broad strokes. Cyclops is basically away on a solo mission, and a very personal solo mission. And on his way back, he finds himself through various kind of misadventures, lost in the wilderness with his visor gone. So he can, and the point about him obviously is that he has this enormous kind of concussive force beam, that he can't stop other than by closing his eyes, and that, if left unchecked, basically has the same concussive force as a hydrogen bomb. It's like pretty destructive. I mean, the sort of running joke that friends always make is like he basically has a rail gun in his face, and so he's lost in the wilderness. He joins up with a young mutant called May, and they're basically trying to find their way back across the wilderness with a new team of Reavers in tow, or rather pursuing them. So Cyclops basically has to wander around blindfold. So he is basically relying on this mutant kid to be his eyes. And all of his, this is the point about Cyclops, is that he is Mr. Strategic, right? I mean, Kieran in his run, I think, said he doesn't alphabetize his plans because that only gives him the same number of letters as the alphabet. He likes to have even contingency plans than that, right? So he's that guy, and this takes all of that away from him because he is relying on someone else to basically see for him, and his usual stratagems can't be employed. So you're basically sort of seeing him at his most vulnerable, but something that has been touched on before, but we're trying to sort of tease out more than it usually is the fact that he really does have, for want of a better expression, a wild side. So there are various kind of nods to this. So if you look at the kind of there are some conflicting accounts of his origin, depending on what you read, but it's broadly agreed upon that he bailed out of his parents' plane with Alex and was found by local law enforcement and taken to an orphanage at some period of time later. And I was sort of discussing this with Tom. I thought, well, it'd be kind of fun if they were, and this is all headcanon, I don't sort of refer to this explicitly, but like, wouldn't it be fun if they were actually missing for quite a while? And then that obviously raises the question, Scott as the older brother, what did he do to keep himself and Alex alive? And so, there are all of these questions raised in the book about, this guy who is, very much, considered a Boy Scout, very much considered sort of buttoned down, uptight, overly controlled. What happens when you take that control away? Who is this person underneath? And so, one of the sort of metaphors that I kept, or one of the sort of similes that I kept referring, going back to, is this idea that, to me at least, it is possible that his visor is akin to like a control rod in a nuclear reactor. If you remove the control rod, a meltdown begins, and that's very much what you see in our story. Is his main means of controlling both the situations he finds himself in and also himself has been taken away from him, and he begins to express sort of character traits that you don't normally associate with him, levels of sort of ferocity and wildness and aggression, that kind of thing. I mean, I pitched it as survival horror, and it's very much. So if you've seen stuff like, Deliverance or The Grey, you've got a pretty good idea of what to expect.
So what, if any, about, writing Cyclops is difficult, or, trying to, it sounds like you're putting your own spin on it, but is there anything about his character that is, if you found challenging to maybe focus on? Or
yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of it is, but I viewed it as a challenge, right? So one of the things, I mean, I've mentioned this elsewhere, but I think it bears repeating. One of the reasons why I think he gets consistently misinterpreted as a character is because he is inscrutable, right? You can't, even with sort of pictorial representation, empathy mostly happens. You either watch someone's mouth or you watch their eyes. That's really where kind of empathy begins. Is you read someone's face, and the eyes are an absolutely key part of it. And you can't do that with him ever, because he's either wearing ruby quartz glasses that obscure his eyes, or he's wearing a visor which obscures his eyes. And it removes quite a few of your weapons as a dramatist. Now, you'll have people like, so like Walt Simonson used to do this wonderful thing where, like, when he was angry, he'd have like a little wisp of like red smoke, just coming out of the fire.
Yeah.
So you had sort of proxies like that. But in the main, you're relying on him to say what he's feeling or to express that through behavior. But you can't do a lot of that kind of, emotional acting that I think is, is key really to sort of building empathy with the character. So I think some people, I think, bounce off him for that reason. They might not be aware that they're bouncing off him for that reason, but they are. But to my mind, no. So if I'm doing a book with him solo, right? So the easy thing to do is to give him internal narration, because then you've got a window into his thought processes, and that's fine. And then you don't necessarily have to do the kind of hard work of establishing sort of an emotional connection through sort of other means. I didn't want to do that because I thought because I was talking to some people about it. I was tempted to initially, and I had a word with some fellow pros, and they strongly advised me to lean away from internal narration because it's much more interesting to just follow him in terms of his behavior. So you manage to gauge his emotional state from what he's doing rather than what he's thinking. Remember, you can't read his eyes. And so, I mean, that was a big reason why I gave him this sort of almost like teenage mutant foil, was basically because otherwise, it'd be, and it was going to be like a silent comic, right? But another reason I did that, by the way, another reason why I steered clear of the internal narration was because, I mean, I think one of the ways I managed to sort of sell the book internally, right, was to say, this is a Wolverine story, but we've swapped Wolverine out for Cyclops, and it immediately opens up like a sort of realm of new possibilities. This is a sort of, lost in the wilderness, being pursued by merciless hunters, right? That is, by any index, a Wolverine story, right? But it's a Wolverine story that we've seen. And I mean, certainly, like in comics, I don't think we've seen this too many times with Cyclops. It's the wrong guy for the wrong. It's the wrong guy for this to happen to.
Right.
Which immediately made it interesting to me. So yeah, I took away the narration, and so now you just have his interactions with this kid and these terrible things that he's doing to survive. Basically, to read his thought processes. And it was challenging, but it was a lot of fun.
Now you've written him before, like in the Infinity comic.
Sure.
Is there, obviously it sounds like there's a different approach that you took there that you're taking, in this with him. Are you, or did you have to kind of, because I see that you have, the direction you're going with him being alone and all that. Did you kind of have to forget everything that you learned writing him for the, for that series?
I mean, it's a great question. To an extent, because I think, he was with Jean in that story, and obviously, they have a shorthand, and I was very much. I got very lucky with that Infinity story in the sense that I had a very kind of narrow window to do almost like a sort of bridging story between sort of the end of Krakoa and the beginning of From the Ashes, right? So, Jean's about to go into space and sort of, on this sort of voyage of self-discovery, leaving Scott behind. And I had a very sort of short off-ramp where I could sort of look at the sort of the emotional impact of that. It was a very sort of intimate story, but look at the emotional impact of that because, Steph, when she was writing Phoenix, was very kind of insistent, understandably, that Scott was going to be kind of okay with this decision, that he wasn't going to be possessive, that he wasn't going to sort of hold Jean back from this sort of cosmic odyssey. And we managed to sort of talk it out between Jed and Steph. I was basically kind of, talking to them both simultaneously. I said, well, do we have, is there an interval that we can occupy here where we at least show that it's a wrench, because it's, yes, he can be absolutely fine with her leaving. But he doesn't, I think the point I made was like, he doesn't have to be doing cartwheels about it either. He can be fine with it, but also
it's not a party. It's not, bachelor time.
Yeah, like bummed that he's not going to be seeing his wife for a while.
Yeah.
So it was very much a kind of two-hander. And I did get to sort of go into sort of Scott's neuroses to an extent. I got to revisit like Black Bug Room from Grant Morrison's run, which I always thought was really cool. and I mean, if memory serves, I think I used sort of omniscient, like third person narration as well. So that did a lot of kind of heavy lifting. But with this, it was so I didn't have to kind of unlearn it. And I think I've sort of carried on some of those. I still think it's the same. I mean, sorry to kind of go into sort of a wider theme, but I've been thinking about this a lot, right? Because this is the first time I've kind of engaged with a character who has, on a sustained basis. I've done like Spider-Man one shots and everything, and you get like there's a peak of interest, and then because you're only doing one, it kind of dissipates. But this is the first time I've kind of dealt with a character who has a really passionate and engaged fan base, who have a very, very definite idea of who this guy is, right? And some of those perspectives are like mutually exclusive, right? So even if I were to just take every one of them on board and go, yep, some of them are mutually exclusive. Because there are certain areas that they think, oh well, that's the authentic Scott, and then there are other people, and nobody's wrong, because it's just there's always an era that kind of speaks to them, and I tried to sort of almost sort of do the Morrison Batman thing of just going, okay, what if all of these eras are equally canonical? There is no contradiction. That's just who this guy is. And the theme that I kept coming back to again and again and again was duty. So it doesn't matter whether he is, a sort of buttoned down mutant bureaucrat or a mutant revolutionary who's, prepared to cross ethical lines that he hadn't considered before, whether he's most closely aligned with Xavier or whether he's more closely aligned with Magneto, and all the sort of pendulum points in between. The through line is that he is always what he thinks his people need him to be in that moment. And so that was really the kind of continuity that I was kind of trying to work with, is, this is a guy who is absolutely driven, almost single-mindedly, by the survival and flourishing of his people.
So how was it different or the same from doing the Sentinels, which is another limited series where you had a set length to tell the story you wanted to tell, but if I remember correctly, and again, not an X-Man person, the Sentinels were kind of bad, good, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Sentinels was a very different book. Just on a sort of meat and potatoes level, it was an ensemble book. It was a team book, so I had a lot more kind of character dynamics to jungle. Because the thing that I like about doing sort of this as a sort of solo Cyclops book is that it gets to be a bit more of a kind of character study. But Sentinels was more that was written more kind of top down, right? So Sentinels absolutely was a bad guy book, and I never made any kind of bones about it. It was a bad guy book, but I thought it was something that I tried to do something that I'm not saying didn't exist, but I hadn't seen before, which was that you had always seen, and it didn't matter whether it was like God loves, man kills, or whatever. And by the way, all beautiful depictions, right? Beautifully kind of rendered and wonderful kind of characterization. But my abiding memory of a lot of kind of anti-mutant sentiment is that it's should I put it like emotive prejudice? So, the antagonists that the X-Men would be handling were people who are sort of passionately and vociferously anti-mutant, right? What I hadn't seen was something closer to like the banality of evil, which I think, not to sort of stray too far, but like I think, it's like, I mean, the term I think was coined by Hannah Arendt, who was sort of talking about the Holocaust, right? But the banality of evil in the sense that, you know, the Sentinels, you know, the people who are kind of hunting mutants. The thing that I wanted to kind of reinforce was that they don't really hate mutants. They just punch in. You know what I mean? They punch in and they punch out. It's a job. I wrote a kind of diner scene where the leader at the time of the sort of Sentinel troop is having breakfast with his son, and they have a mutant waitress and you know, visibly mutant waitress, and he's telling his son not to stare because, you know, mutants, you know, they have a rough go of it, and his son's wearing like a Dazzler t-shirt and stuff, and this is not someone who has a problem with mutants, but so much evil, and I think that was kind of that was what I was trying to explore with it, was, you know, so much evil in this world is conducted by people who basically hide behind bureaucracy. So, you know, well, you know, I don't hate these people. I'm just doing my job. I'm just following orders. Sentinels was a book about people who were just following orders. And I hadn't seen that before, so I thought that was a story worth telling. Whereas with this, you know, the antagonists are the Reavers, and, you know, once again we are in radicalized, vicious anti-mutant sentiment. But we have a new team of Reavers in this one. It's still led by Donald Pierce because, you know, the Reavers without Donald Pierce is like a day without sunshine. But these are young people who have been sort of radicalized during the Krakoan era, and you know, wanted to kind of get back to that idea that, because, you know, you've had various kind of iterations of the Reavers over the years. You know, there are sort of, you know, ones that are created by nanotech and ones that, you know, go to sort of, you know, Spiral's body shop, and, you know, but I wanted to kind of get back to that visceral idea of, you know, and the sort of the central paradox, right, which is that these are people who are so passionately pro-human that they will have all of their humanity removed and replaced with robot parts so they can hunt mutants more effectively. So, you know, the hypocrisy of that, you know, they're so passionately pro-human that the first thing they throw away is their humanity. And so, you know, you kind of see that in the first issue, you kind of see that surgery taking place. And I wanted it to be, I said, you know, can I make this really visceral? Like, I don't want this to be, you know, like a Tesla factory. You know, I want this to be, you know, Donald Pierce is there with a bone saw. You know, can I do that? And they said, yeah, sure. So, yeah, it's quite unpleasant.
So speak about a little bit about the who you're working with, art wise and on coloring and.
Yeah. Okay, so art-wise, I am working with the fabulous, the inestimable Roj Antonio, who, and I said this before, and I stand by this. Whatever you think of what I've done with this book, I would lay money on Roj being one of your favorite ex-artists when the book's done. He's just crushed it in ways that you know, that you always hope for a sort of level of like creative synergy when you're working with someone, and Roj has just delivered beyond my wildest dreams. And it is just that thing of that every now and then you work with someone and it almost feels psychic because they're just absolutely picking up on what you are trying to communicate, and then they just take it further than you ever imagined. Roj has done that, you know. I can't wait to see what he does next. And on colors, we have Fernando Cifuentes, who I don't think I was familiar with his work before we started this, but he's just really kind of leaning into like a native palette in a way that I didn't think was going to be possible for this book, but has absolutely just enhanced it. I mean, funnily enough, So when we put up the preview pages, Eric Canetti just messaged me and said, "Who did the colors?" And I said, "Oh, it's Fernando Cifuentes." And just I just got this lovely message from Eric saying, please congratulate the whole team. But yeah, those colors are spectacular. So all the right people seem to dig it. But yeah, no, it's a dream team, and I'm being edited by Darren Shan, who I've worked with many times now, and also recently Lauren Amaro, who Lauren and Darren basically kind of got me into Marvel in the first place about 5 years ago. So it kind of feels it's like getting the band back together. It's great.
Yeah. And just briefly, how I know you have a Carnage run.
I worked with Roche on the Carnage run. That was where we first worked together, and it was when and hand to God, this is what happened. So when we were discussing artists for the book, I didn't sort of I think I suggested a couple of people, and Darren kind of came back with a list of people that he had on his short list, and he said Roche's name, and I just went, stop. Yeah, we're done. Yeah, we're good. We're good. So as soon as you meant, because I did, I think 2 issues with Roche, and he pushed the kind of horror elements that I was going for, like way further than I thought we were going to be able to get with. And so I'd already kind of filed him away sort of in my mental Rolodex, like I'm working with that guy again, and here we are.
Mm-hmm. So as we kind of start to wrap up, anything else about the book that you want to make sure people know about, or?
It's great. That's a good thing to know. No, I'm desperately proud of it. One thing I will say, and again, I've said it elsewhere, but I think it bears repeating, is, I know a lot of people are very passionate about this character, and I certainly wouldn't want to do any injury to anybody's conception of who this character is. But all I will say is, I would not presume to claim that this is the definitive take on Scott Summers. Mm-hmm. All I'll say is it's my definitive take, and I am fiercely proud of it. And I think if people read it in the spirit in which it's intended, I think they're really, really going to enjoy it.
And any other projects that you can briefly mention? You don't have to. If you I don't want you to get in trouble.
I'm trying to think what's been NDA'd and what hasn't. Big stuff. Yeah.
We'll get together then. So where can people find you if you brave the social media?
So I tend to lurk mainly on Blue Sky, but I'm also on Instagram, also on Facebook. I think I'm getting to the point of kind of shame. I am still on Twitter, but I don't feel good about it.
I don't feel good about Comic Watch being on Twitter either, but it's kind of a necessary evil.
But as
soon as Blue Sky reaches above Twitter, I think we're kind of shifting. I don't know. I might call them.
It's like every time I go on there, I feel like I've sort of opened a vent of hell. Find me on there, and if you want to, and a kind word wouldn't go amiss. No, I don't know. People are very nice, but yeah, no, it is. You do see all sorts on there, but yeah. So I'm pretty much kind of everywhere. I think the only one I'm not on is I think I didn't get on TikTok in time, and now it sounds as though TikTok's gone very rapidly downhill. So
yeah,
I missed the boat.
That's okay. But again, thank you for taking the time today to chat.
No, thank you so much for having me again, Chad. I really appreciate it.
And as my co-host likes to end the shows saying, the world can be a terrible place, especially now. But do some good, buy local art, support a local business, and just don't be a dick.
I'm trying.